Hello, Covalence and YouTube watchers. We're picking up in part 3 of this video where we're going to connect everything we learned from parts 1 and part 2 of our learning server-side development fundamentals video with Express here, and we're going to connect it all to a actual website. So we're actually going to be able to visualize this stuff and interact with the form and send information to our server, and not just from a API testing tool such as Postman or Hopscotch. We're actually going to build this into a little mini app, and I think that's that. In the end of the last video, I mentioned that we bridge that gap finally, and how all this stuff combines together, and how you begin to understand that server and client world are two entirely separate realms of existence, right? So that's what I mean. So as always, at the top of the video, thank you all for tuning in. Go watch parts 1 and 2 if you haven't already. The companion repository should be linked in the description down below. Use the drop down through the various branches of the repository to find out the various video bits of code, so you know where video 1 ends versus video 2 versus video 3. You use the drop downs to find what branch corresponds to what video you're watching, so you can look at the code there to see where you are or where you want to be. The README will also have links to this information about this playlist. I'm going to add it probably at the top that says, the link to the YouTube videos, the playlist of the videos, as well as maybe like the links to the various branches as well. But yeah, we've done all our server side stuff, and I think we won't have to add much here anymore. All we have to do now is actually build out the front end. So remember, they are separate realms of existence. Oh, and as always, check the description down below for a link to our community membership. For $25 a month, you get access to our Discord community where you can chat with me, give me video idea requests, go through your own coding journey, and actually receive some support and uplifting and not being torn down like you might be in Reddit comments or Stack Overflow questions. You get access to our front end and back end courses, combine them to our full stack program, which is exactly what those two courses are, as well as my Zero to Hero Advanced React course. And anything else I do course-wise, or in my co-workers and colleagues here at Covalence add to our list of courses or update our courses, you get access to them right away in the community membership. No additional charge for that stuff. So if you have interest in that, check the link in the description down below for that. Otherwise, let's continue. So we finished out our server. We're now moving to client-side JavaScript. We have our website being hosted on localhost 3000. So instead of 3000/character, I go to 3000. This is where we wound up with our lovely website here, which is kind of doo-doo. So we're going to go ahead and make it a bit nicer looking. We're going to go to getbootstrap.com by going to Google and searching that. I like how I typed in get bootstrap, auto-completed it, and instead of writing .com, I hit enter and went and clicked the link for getbootstrap.com. Beautiful stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to just grab the link from the CDN. I don't think we're going to be using any JavaScript from Bootstrap. I should include it here, but out of laziness, let's just include the CSS and call it a day. I'm going to add it above my CSS style, above my styles. In my styles, I'm going to remove the background color. I don't think I'll be using any custom styles. We're going to do Bootstrap here just for simplicity because I know most of their classes. Now that I have those correctly linked, let's see if this kicks on. Let's do something like text-center. If text center kicks on for the H1 for a class here, then I'll know we're good to go. Yeah, I mean, I could look at the font style, but there you go. We now have Bootstrap enabled. It looks pretty decent. To my body, let's go ahead and add a little bit of styling. We're going to do BG light text-dark. I don't know if that's going to make that big of a difference here. It kind of dimmed out the background there. The BG light is like it's a much softer white than the harsh default HTML white there. Something I include on my sites mostly for just to make it kind of more visible. Let's go ahead and add a main with a class of container to our website. Inside of here, I like to add my class of row. We're going to do a justify. Rows are flex containers. We're going to center any columns inside of this row. I'm also going to bump this down from the top of the page by about 5 margin units. I think that's the max for Bootstrap. Inside of this row, and we're gonna also make names for this. We're gonna say like character overview row. So I now have a comment that tells me what this row's purpose is going to be. By default, we're going to take all 12 columns, but anything bigger than screen size medium, we're going to default to 7 or 6 columns, just so it doesn't expand like comically large on big screen sizes. But on mobile screen sizes, it'll be a 12 column size. So, you can always just go look at the repo for these class names here. If you're not interested in this part, you can just copy and paste the HTML on over, but I'm going to code this out because, again, I think it's fun to code out here. So what we're doing is we're building out, if you recall, at the end of the last video, we had completed a full character with classes, right? Their chosen classes and their levels that they chose them at. So we can take this information and we want to display it on the website. We'll talk about how to display it here in just a second, but for now, I actually want to build out the table that's going to display this information inside of it. Now that I have the column, let's go ahead and build out the following. I'm going to build like a card out with a border, some box shadow. We'll do a rounded border with some box shadow, some padding on it. And we're going to make it a starker BG white color compared to the light color, the light off-white color of the page itself. So it kind of pops out with the box shadow. Inside of that, I'm going to have an H3 of text-centered. And we're going to bump margin down below it. It's going to say character overview. That margin bottom was going to bump this table that we're about to add below the character overview portion. We're going to add a table for Bootstrap. It is table hover. So if we hover over these things, it should give us some like syntax highlighting. Well, not syntax highlighting, but like mouse over highlighting, I believe is what it adds for us here. And we're going to add an ID to this because we're going to want to easily select it from our JavaScript code once it comes to some DOM manipulation here coming up in just a moment. So there is our lovely content for the table. Let's go ahead and add a head to this table. Inside of it, we're going to add a row to the table head. It's going to have two columns. One is going to be for the level, and one is going to be for the class chosen. Both of these THs, I believe, need to have an attribute called scope that calls them columns so they know how big they are. So there we go. There's our T head with a row with two columns inside of it. Okay. So outside of that, we're going to have a T body where we're going to have an empty value for now because we're going to be generating the TR and THs from the JavaScript code itself. And we're going to go ahead and add, I think we can, if I need to add an ID, character levels. We might add a character levels ID to this T body to make it easy to select it if need be. We're going to see how I do this from the code here in just a moment. But yeah, that's it. That's what's going to be our table here. It should populate with nothing here, so we should see nothing. But yeah, there's our lovely table. I'm super zoomed in. That's why it's super big right there, right? So that's what it looks like, column size 7. But remember, when I hit that medium breakpoint zoom, then it goes to col 12, and that's why it looks so big right now. So there's our lovely table. It should be like 1 fighter, 2 fighter, 3 fighter, etc. That's what it should end up looking like. I don't think there's tons of fancy class names that we're going to have in our JavaScript code to do that. It should just be simple TRs and TDs. So let's just go ahead and see what that might look like. We're going to envision it. We're going to have a TR, TD, level 1. That's the level column. The class level should say fighter, right? That'll be each row for each bit of progression that we have. So a new row will be level 2 fighter. That's what it's going to end up looking like. So this is what our JavaScript code, our DOM manipulation, will be having to make. Yeah, so as you can, there's the table hover. There's the table itself. There is the table data cells of 1 fighter, 2 fighter, etc. That is going to be generated from this request right here. So as you can see, our array, we're probably going to have to loop over it and take each level, put it into a TD, put each class, put it into a TD, stick them both inside of a row, and stick that row in the table, and we'll have everything generated. So that's what it's going to look like. And now that we have a good idea of what we're going to be generating, let's go actually go do it from our code. So I'm going to collapse and close all my server stuff since we are done there. Remember, they are separate realms of existence. We are not going to be allowed to import code from our server to client or from client to server. No go. You have 2 console logs now. One for your client-side code, which will be happening in your browser and your console there, aka this lovely place. And you're also going to have console logs if you're debugging problems on your server as well, aka where it runs in your terminal. That's going to be something to very much keep in mind. You have 2 places you debug problems at now, and this is where I tell my students you got to get good at isolating where the problem is and where you want to apply a fix. Is it a server-side problem or is it a client-side problem, right? If it works fine in your Postman, Hopscotch, whatever tests and it responds as it should here, then that's a good indication that the server is probably fine and it's a client-side issue. So you go to your client side, check the console there, and start debugging problems as is. If you think your test here is fine, you don't know why it's failing from your server, then you go here and try and mock the test or your code from the client side, mock it up in a tab here and test it and see why your server might fail, and then go check your server side logs from there. So always divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. Divide it, client or server. It's a server, go to server, find out which endpoint. Inside the endpoint, test that action. Test the action a number of different ways and add console logs, see where it fails. That's how you're gonna go from now on. So yeah, that's as simple as this portion of the website needs to be for displaying information. Let's actually go get it. So instead of just console logging hello from JS like I did in video 1, we are going to actually request this data. So basically, how does this tab of a GET request to this endpoint translate into JavaScript code? There are libraries that help you, there are built-in ways to help you, and we're going to be talking about a simple, modern, built-in way into browsers called fetch. This is how you make HTTP requests to a server, and basically this tab in Hopscotch has to be recreated as a fetch request. By default, fetch will go to a GET request, right? So typically what you do is you write the URI, or Universal Resource Indicator, aka the path, the route, whatever you want to call it. And then you have a config object as the second argument that will typically have a property called method that you will write get into. However, like I'd said, fetch will default to GET requests by default, which is why we don't have to have this object here, right? All we have to do is write the indicator, or how do we find it? What endpoint is it? And you might be thinking, okay, Luke, so we're going to do http://localhost //localhost 3000/character and calling it a day. Now, in production, you won't be running your website on localhost 3000, so you would have to always remember to come and change this request every single time you want to go from testing to production, from development to production, from development to production. You have to keep altering it, and that's going to be such a headache. But ask yourself, where is the website currently running? It's on path localhost 3000. These static files of the website are served from the same place that our HTTP web server, Node Express, is running. If the location of the site and the server are the same, you do not have to write this root URL. You can write just a relative path like this, and what it's going to do is it's going to assume that with this leading /, it will by default add it to the root URL in the location in the browser, aka localhost 3000. It will automatically do that for us. Now, fetch is an asynchronous action. Making HTTP requests are async. Fetch is built in with promises. So we can say, then get the response and console log the response in my browser. If an error happens, catch the error and console log the error should it occur. There's way better ways of UI, UX of handling errors, but for now we're going to keep it simple like that and just take a look at the response. The important part about fetch is that it's very unopinionated in its opinions. What I mean by that is you might be wondering, well, fetch should be smart enough to get the list of character details and display them in the console log, and you are unfortunately incorrect. It does not do that for you like something like Axios. Axios is another very popular library for fetching data on both client and server-side JavaScript. And Axios will go ahead and parse the body correctly for you, but unfortunately, fetch does not. Fetch gives us what's called a response object. The response object is some metadata that is useful or annoying depending on what happens. We have a couple of important ones. Body. Body has a couple different things on it we can get information from it from. We have headers, if we want to check what headers on the response are. OK. OK is a Boolean of either, well, false or true. OK is good for status codes 2 to 300. OK false is status code bad for 400 and 500s. Like those are bad status codes, and OK toggles to false. So that's what's annoying about fetch, in that errors from the server, i.e. status code 400, level limit reached, does not catch and throw and catch an error. It merely gives you a response. It's still a response. It's an error response or a bad response, but it's a response nonetheless. Meaning, the error would be OK false, status 400, and it would expect you to handle the errors properly. So you almost have to come in here on this response that we're console logging and write the following. If response not OK, handle the error. Otherwise, do something else, right? So it expects you to be writing this stuff out yourself, which is why some people may not like it. But I think it's become such a modern tool that we might as well get used to writing it and handling it ourselves. We should do some error handling, but we're going to keep it simple here. Instead, we are going to focus on a particular set of methods on this, a function called JSON. JSON is another function built onto the response object that is a function that we invoke that it also returns a promise. So the response, or res.json in this case function, is a promise. So what we need to do is write return res.json. This will tell our fetch to fetch that endpoint, then get the response from that endpoint, then make a promise to take the response that's streaming data to us and parse it, because we know it's JSON data, to valid JavaScript, which means I can then make a call to say, hey, then I should get some data, and let's console log that data from the return res JSON. With this code in place, let's take a look at what we get here in the browser. That looks familiar, doesn't it? That is exactly what our hopscotch tab is responding with: total levels and an array of chosen levels of our given character. So there you go. That is exactly what we're looking for here. Now, yeah, so for some shorthand, without the return keyword, we're in a bit of a conundrum. We have to have return there, because if we didn't, we'd have to daisy chain the dot then inside of there. And if we did that pattern more than once, we end up with the pyramid of doom. We end up with a daisy chained indented mess, which is why that return keyword is so important there. A lot of my newbie students forget that. This is a promise. Promises are resolved with dot then when that happens. But if I want to keep the indent chain vertical and not scaled in like a pyramid, the return this promise keyword is very important. But we can leverage some ES6 shorthand by dropping the curly braces after our arrow, dropping the keyword return, the semicolon after res JSON, move it all to one line, and that's called an implicit one-line return. It will implicitly, aka without us directly writing it, return that promise, which allows us to daisy chain the dot then on the outside, and that's what you see a lot on articles and examples online. So make sure that shorthand change didn't change anything. It didn't. Now, let's actually, instead of writing all of our code in this dot then, let's write a utility function called function update character that will take some data, aka our what we're console logging right here. And what it needs to do is it needs to select the table body and loop through this array of classes and display them as TR and TDs. So what we're going to do is say, let's get the table body document query selector. And this is a server side. This is a server-side little playlist here, so that's why I'm kind of blasting through this DOM stuff. If you don't know this DOM stuff and want to learn, there's plenty of great resources online, plenty of great videos on our channel, and again, our community membership has access to a front-end fundamentals course, which takes you through all these basics to understand what I'm writing here if you don't. So, we're going to go to character table tbody. Didn't I add an ID to the tbody anyway? I did. Why don't we just do that, Luke? All right, that should work. There's our table body with that query selector. Now that we have it, I need to reference the data I'm passing in. With the data I'm passing in, I would like it to go to the classes property, like that. And then we're going to go through each progression of our classes. So I'm going to say, for each progression in our list of classes, let's console log progression and take a look to see if it works. So instead of console logging data, we're going to take update character and pass it here in place of console log, and we're going to see what this does. Okay, let's grab that and let's see what happens. Yeah, so now we're looping and logging each bit of progression. Each one of these objects is what progression is representing in the console log. So we have progression.level and progression.class. It represents each level progression that we've done on our character. So instead of logging progression, let's just actually make some content appear. So here we go. Const row is a document create element, a tr element. Const each level cell or progression cell, we're going to say is a document create element of a TD. This TD or level cell will have a text content that will be equal or assign the value of the progression.level. So that was .level, progression.level is where that comes from. We're going to append that to the row. So we're going to say row append child level cell. Then we're going to make another one. Class cell equals document dot create element TD. This class cell will have a text content, text content assigned to each progression dot class, right? Progression dot class. Then we're going to append that to the row, the tr, so row append child, this TD represented by the class cell variable. Now that we have that, what we're going to do is we need to go to the table body we selected and append the row itself. And it's going to go through that for each loop. So now that we have that written in place, let's save the file, refresh, and wouldn't you know it, we have an awesome table display of our class. So that's our leveled up character right there in a nice looking table-ish, right? So there you go. All right. Now that we have that written in place, looking pretty good, looking ginormous, depending on how much I zoom in, looks good, right? Now, what bothers me is the lowercase letter of the string. This is a fun little algorithm for you to know how to do, is what happens if I want to make this display a bit nicer and I capitalize the first letter of this string. Now, it makes sense from a data standpoint that my backend doesn't care about capitalization because that could be a massively annoying issue on the backend, differentiating between capital R rogue and lowercase r rogue. So I would choose to leave it as is on the server. Let's say that you and I now are client-side developers and we don't have access to the server. So if I can't go change how the server functions with capital letters, what do? I will choose to, down here in the class cell text content, to say, that works. What we're going to do is we're going to get the class, which is a string, and I want to slice that string to pieces. I want it to take the first letter represented by this, but I think we could just not even do that. I think we could just do the following. Look what happens if I just do class square bracket 0. Remember, strings work on the same index-based positioning that arrays do. So if I do square bracket 0, that should mean the first letter of the string. Fighter, rogue, or rogue and ranger. Oh God, that'd be confusing to remember between letters, right? Fighter, ranger, rogue, somewhere in here. Now that I have the first letter, let's uppercase it. So we're going to say .to uppercase like that. Now that I have that letter uppercased, we have to add the rest of the letters unmodified. How do we do that? We're going to do that with the string concatenation of the original class name, which is progression.class. And I only want a copy of every letter except the first one. We know that the first letter index position is 0. So if I say make a copy of every letter after the first index position, so the first index position and to the end of the string, it will give me the rest of that string. So that right there is some little knowledge for you of how to handle that problem, which is very common when dealing with API responses that don't care about case sensitivity. Now, because we are the server-side developers, we could also choose to go do this on our server in the response instead of here. I think it's worthwhile to think about that way as server-side developers now. So here we go. What if I want to just go make my server respond with the correct format? I don't want to mess with my data integrity. I only want to change my server response instead. How can we do that? Well, let's go check it out. in my server code, back in my server file, my get request is what sends the character data. So what happens if I want to take character data and modify the array for it to do the exact same trick I did right here? I'm going to copy and paste this code really quickly and modify some names for it to make sense. What if I want to handle that on the server side and not the client side? That's a choice we can make since we are writing both the server and the client. So let's go. I want to make a new array of objects, right? So what I could choose to do is, remember, character data is the following structure. It is an object that has a property of total levels and a property of classes, which is the array I want to begin modifying. So we have to do something new here. I'm going to say, I can write it in the response JSON just directly, or I can make a new variable that represents all this stuff. Let's just do it that way. Let's just say const character data modified equals a new object that has the same property of total levels that will be whatever my character's data's total levels currently is. It also will have a classes property that will be an array of my modified data. How am I going to modify it? We're going to do that by going to our original character data, the classes array. And instead of for each, we're going to map over my current list of classes for each progression in that class. I want to return an object that represents each thing as it currently is. Remember, each object had a level property. So now we're going back to our character JSON, had a level and class property. So the level needs to be whatever our progression level currently is anyway. And our class, you guessed it, needs to be whatever it currently is with all those modifications made. That is going to make a new array over the old array without modifying the original array. Hence why we call this character data modified. Let's alter it and send this new response here with this object structure. So we've now chosen to do this on the back end. We modified it on the back end. And look at that. We now have capital letters there. There are an incredible amount of shorthands we could do here because some of you that have some more experience might recognize that we don't need to do all this right here. So what we could choose to do is, what if I simply want to modify classes and not everything else? I could choose to simply do a spread out the rest of character data, which should just be total levels, and then modify classes. That way, if I change my data structure, so we can see total levels did not change, it's still there, and my classes are still modified, and nothing new has been added. So that means that I'm now taking the original character data object and spreading out everything else outside of classes. So if I go and modify my structure to include other things, I don't lose those other things. The same is true down here. And if I'm only modifying class and I don't care about anything else, I can simply choose to write spread out the progression and modify the class. That way, if my objects become more than just level and class, if I added 3 to 4 or 5 more properties, I don't lose them, and I don't have to write them all out manually by hand. ES6 shorthand, I can drop the keyword return and change it from curly braces to parentheses. So if you change it from curly braces to parentheses with no return keyword, that becomes an ES6 implicit multi-line return. And that right there is one way of modifying the data with a bunch of ES6 shorthand and sending that modified data as the response right there. So as you can see, no tricks up my sleeve. It's just the exact same response structure with the letters now capitalized, which means I can go back to my client-side code, and this now just becomes progression.class. And you might be wondering, Luke, that seems like so much more effort compared to what we had to do on the front end, which was just the slice shenanigans. But again, I want y'all thinking as server-side devs now, where do I want to do this? You might be arguing this is complete overkill for this API. It shouldn't do something like this because it's not technically REST. Like I said, you can break REST all you want. It doesn't really matter. But the point is here, I'm pointing out that you can modify your response structure to be whatever you need it to be. It is not hard-coded to be just the resource itself. It could be the resource with some modifications in it. Heck, We can make two. /character gets us the raw, /character/raw gets us the raw data, /character/display gets us the nicely displayed data. So then we have different versions or different endpoints that respond with different things. Again, the point is you have the ability to modify the data wherever or however you want on your server and just send that to your website. They should not be directly linked. But nevertheless, because we are writing out the server, I wanted to take a moment to go back to our server and show y'all that you have the ability to do this now should you need to for your projects, right? You are not limited to making your website and make those modifications anymore, right? So there you go. There is our lovely display portion of the website. And now we're going to talk about how to mimic the next tab from Hopscotch, which is our post tab. This one is a wee bit more complex in that we have two different ways we can approach it. We see that we programmatically fetched the data and displayed it here inside of our code base. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we could just drop this update character since it takes that arg. And that should be enough actually to go ahead and do that. Does that work? Yeah, it still works just fine. See? Because our function had one parameter, which is the same parameter our .then callback had, I can just shorthand it to that if I wanted to. Anyway, but what about posting data? We are going to do so with a default HTML submit now. How does that work? Well, like I said, if it's a default HTML submit, it's going to be over here in our code. What I'm going to do is add a new comment that says class level form as our row, as our comment, because that's what it's going to represent. It's going to represent the options for leveling up our character. I'm going to do the same section code here. So I'm going to copy and paste my section row for Bootstrap purposes. It's going to be the same type of column, so it looks consistent. Copy and paste the columning right there as well. And from there, we're going to go ahead and write out our form. There's our form. It's going to have minimum 3 properties. Class for styling, action and method for submitting. In terms of class, it is going to do something similar, which will be border, rounded border, shadow, lots of padding, BG white to have it offset and look a bit nicer. The action and method properties, or attributes rather, are as follows. The method is surprise, post. It is the HTTP verb that our form is submitting to. The action, I've talked about that. The action is on our server, this thing, right? This function that runs on the post request. But in this case, it is the path or route to our server endpoint. So from our HTML on our action, we need to write /level up. So that is where the verb and the path both combine into, right? Our action and our method now line up right there. So in the form, we're going to include a couple simple things here. We're going to do a quick label. Label 4 will be for selected class. That'll be the ID of it. The class needs to be form-label for Bootstrap. It's going to say choose a class. That's going to be our label. How are we looking so far? Pretty good. There's a beautiful looking form. Let's put, we got to put a title in the form, Luke. What are you talking about, man? Right above that, label. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a h2.textCenter MB4, and it's going to say character progression. And then below that, we're going to put everything into a div that just bumps things down even further. And then there's our label. So whatever. There's our label. And here's how our dropdown is going to work. It is a combination of a select statement that is filled in with options like that. So that's the format of our select and them options. So the select name is important. The name of your input right here, this name, is what corresponds, and we're going to have a class eventually too. And the name of this select is important. This attribute that you may not use when you're just learning client-side stuff only is important. Why is it so important? Probably for, I'm imagining there's some accessibility stuff that's important here, but the name is what corresponds to our post body property. So I have to make sure that my name matches what my server request body is expecting. Otherwise, this will not work. So this property we made up, selected class, comes from the name of the input, or in our case, a select field. So I got to make sure that that matches. Okay. For screen reader accessibility purposes, I'm going to make sure those are also a match. I'm going to go ahead and write form-select for my class name right there. Now, the value portion of the form URL encoded will be each option's value. And what's displayed may be, for example, the capital version of it. So I'm sure that you can write an array of objects and do this from code, but out of laziness, I'm going to write it out by hand. Barbarian, like that. Cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, warlock, wizard. Oh, I should have done this off camera. But y'all need to pause the video if you have to, or just go to the repo and grab this. Go to the repo and grab this. Druid, what did I say? We got fighter over here. We got fighter. Oop, I did a capital letter there. That needs to be lowercase. This one's going to be Monkerino. Then we got the Paladin broskies going on here. I got to be consistent. Paladin. Then we had Ranger. Then Rouge. Make sure I don't actually spell Rouge. It's Rogue, I know. Who said it isn't? Sorcerer. Is it or? That looks right. Sork. Warlock. Warlock. Wizard. I was one short. That's weird. Wizard. Yeah, so we have Barbarian, Bard. Barbarian, Bard, Cleric. Druid, Fighter. Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue. Wait, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, we had the 12 classes. Okay, that's what I should have done. All right, so now we have our drop-down options coded out. Let's go take a look. There they are. You might want to put in a placeholder one. I'll have it just start on Barbarian. If you pick it wrong, then you screwed up. So now we pick one from our drop-down, and that drop-down's value populates the right-hand side of the form URL encoded request body. The left hand is the name. So that's where that correspondence comes in, okay? Name of our input, our select, our op, whatever, is the left-hand side of our request body, rec.body.selected class, and the value is what they select, or each option's value, or in the case of a regular input, for example, let's take a look at one. Input. If they had a name of test like that, it would look like the following. There's test. There's the input. If I typed in pizza, here's how it'd populate. The name of the input would be test. The value of the input was what they typed, aka pizza. That is what the request body would populate as if we were doing that here. So that's the correspondence, or how things are tied together by using this old school method. You might be wondering, hey Luke, how does it know how to package URL encoded as the form type? That is this default behavior if we submit the form. It will automatically package URL encoded, key, and selected value when we click the following button. I'm going to make a button that will be in a deflex. I want it to be on the right-hand side of the form, and I want to bump it down a little bit. And we're going to put a button inside of there, button primary for Bootstrap that says level up. And we're going to make sure it will default to a submit button, but we're going to make sure that this button has the type equals submit attribute on it and value to make sure it submits the form, which means we've done it. Now, my server sends an error, right, in the event of the character being max level, but we already know it's a max level character. Let's look what happens here if I test it. So if I want to add a level of Druid at the end of this mess, technically I'm level 12, which we know is a status code 400 from my server. Let's see what happens. We got the response here in the browser. We got level up failed, level up limit reached. That's probably not great for UI UX, but nevertheless, it is the response we expected to see. Here's where you could begin customizing the process. You could catch this error up here in the before the res JSON to say, hey, if this error appears, populate an alert on the page or in the form, some red text above the form or at the bottom of the form that says, hey, level up limit has been reached. And don't just let it appear here as the following, right? So what we could do is, oh goodness, do I really want to do all this work? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do all that stuff. Y'all would just have to make some DOM code that says, get this error message if it's not okay, parse the JSON response, and take this error text and put it into some red text that appears under the form. Let's go remove some levels from this character. Let's make a fresh one. Let's delete all this code. I can do this now. If I delete all this code and if I refresh the page, that makes a new GET request to my server that also populates the initial structure here. So that's why we had that data integrity check that we did in my server code at the end of the last video. So every time I refresh the page after deleting my character, it populates the initial structure of a new character to make sure nothing crashes on the website itself. Let's see if this actually works, right? So if I level up as Barbarian, we get level up successful as a response here. But what if I wanted to go back? It doesn't display it. That is because we don't have any logic that told it to refetch the data on going back. It just looked at a cached version of the page in the browser. But if I manually hit refresh, we get level 1 Barbarian. Now, we should approach this programmatically. What do I mean by that? What we should be doing is having some code that runs a fetch post request from our form right here instead of defaulting to its default behavior. Right? So we have some choices here. We can actually go to our server and make this happen right away. This is a more old school and less of a REST response. The REST response means I send some JSON message that it successfully sent. What if I didn't want to do that? Well, we could do the following. There is a response redirect. So once it submits the form, we can tell the page, hey, once you submit the form with the request, all the code successfully passes. It passes the if statements. It awaits and resolves the promises of writing the data. The response is, job's all done. I want you to redirect back to the home page after that's done, which would trigger a new fetch request, which would display the new level right away. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say we're going to level up another level of Barbarian. And check it out. The form populated, or the table populated with my new data as I level up the character. Congratulations. We have built a full stack project, technically, with a simple HTML DOM front end and Bootstrap with a Node Express backend. You've done it. You have built something that took me a long time to figure out. And I'm a student of Covalence, and I felt like I hobbled through this part of the course and didn't get it until I built like 10 other projects after I completed the course. But I mean, welcome to development. We all get it at different paces. Yeah, so I like making these videos to try and bridge the gap wherever it's needed, and then a lot of the times I take these and turn them into like lessons in the course where I feel like things need to get patched up. But you know, everyone learns differently, and I feel like some people have to build something very much hands-on and be handheld through it to learn it. Some can be taught a lot of theory and just figure it out from there. But yeah, we got it figured out. Let's go ahead and level up a Barbarian to 5. That gets us extra attack. There we go. And then we can level up 3 levels of Rogue, which gets us Thief Fast Hands. You'd also have to write some code or logic to make the drop-down populate back to the previous option. That's some code you have to consider as well. 3 levels of Rogue gets us Fast Hands, which gives us an extra bonus action. And then we can also take a couple levels in Monk to get us, I think, Open Hand Monk. What level are we at? 11? I think we could have done 2 Monk for like bonus action step of the wind and things like that. But yeah, some open hand Monk is always good. And especially if you're Tavern Brawler in Baldur's Gate 3, it's OP as hell. This is a common build. I think you could actually drop 2 levels of Monk and take 2 levels of Fighter for action surge. Just tons of crazy builds you could do here. But yeah, like This is a great baseline project to take and add more features to, or make it more filled out on character progression, like choosing subclasses, building out your total character levels up here, and figuring out, don't do spell slots, that'll be a nightmare to figure out, but adding a couple additional features, and you got yourself a portfolio project. Make this a bit cleaner, style it yourself a little bit and things like that, and you got yourself a solid portfolio project. And y'all leave comments down below for me to continue. I'm happy to continue this series and talk about how we can take our default form behavior and move it to a fully programmatic approach where we have a button click listener that runs a fetch post request that maybe does something like body JSON types, so we can learn how to handle body application JSON types, so we stick to a more REST-oriented approach. If we're going full programmatic, I can also show y'all how to take res redirect, which is a more old school MVC or model view controller approach, and make it back into this, a more traditional REST API approach, that if we get this good status code, we can tell the page to refresh automatically. Or we can go to almost a reactive solution and say, hey, instead of refreshing, just update the state of my level table and call it a day. There's tons of cool things we can unlock if you want to continue it further, but the basics of this series is done. Y'all have a great little server. You understand the basics, hopefully, of server-side development, how to think like a server developer, how the edge cases here differ. We learned how to test the server here and learned a bunch of different server-side terms and things like that. We learned how to modify data. Then we learned how to serve some static files and connect it to a website to make this visually appealing. Because at the end of the day, taking your interviewer or recruiter or your mom and dad, your best friend, your wife, your girlfriend, your significant other, whatever, and taking them to Hopscotch to show them, look, I wrote the server. I wrote the server that shows my character, look how cool this is. They'll be like, okay. But you show them this, they're like, whoa, look what you built. Which, I mean, that's the whole fun part about server-side development, is that it's not very glamorous, but it is a lot of fun in my opinion. So yeah, whatever y'all want, if you want me to continue this in any of these subjects, hit me up in the comments. I love getting comments and getting ideas for more content. I'm happy to take this as far as it wants to be done, far as we want to go. But I have achieved the goals I had planned for this one, so I think it's a wrap for now anyway. Do all the YouTube stuff. Y'all like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification for more videos like this. Make sure you check out my videos tend to come out every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Check out Fridays, where my coworker, Matt Morgan, former employee at Microsoft for like 15, 20 years, crazy smart developer, has insanely useful videos on a variety of insane topics. Make sure you check out his Friday videos. They are always things I even watch to learn new things on. So make sure you check those out. And yeah, just hopefully I'll have fun going through and building this little project here. I did, planning it out. So yeah, happy coding, y'all.